Right, so we're here to welcome Julia today. Thanks so much for joining us, Julia. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. So, as you said, I'm Julia, and I'm here from Cambridge Early Years. Um, what to say about me? I've always had a passion for working with children, and particularly kind of the early years side of things. Ever since I was at school, I knew I wanted to do something with children, and have been really fortunate to now be working in the sector for, gosh, over 20 years, I think. All kinds of areas that I've worked in. I've done the hands-on stuff looking after the children. I've worked in large nurseries managing teams. I've worked for local authorities supporting a whole range of childcare providers, as well as kind of working alongside and supporting parents. What else? I'm early years and play work trained, and I think that's a real bonus actually, because I think the play work side of things can really support those early years learnings for children. And then for about the last 6 years, I've had my own consultancy, Cambridge Early Years, where I've been working directly with childcare providers and families. And my aim in all the work that I do is to kind of support and inspire whoever I'm working with to provide the very best opportunities for children and their development. Yeah, I guess that's me in a nutshell.
And child development's what we're going to be chatting about today.
Fantastic.
So, what's a newborn baby able to do when they're born, when they're first coming out in those first few days and weeks?
Okay, so newborn babies, or human newborn babies I should say, are some of the most kind of vulnerable and dependent babies that are born to kind of mammals. But that doesn't mean that they have got no skills and no learning. So in the last trimester of pregnancy, they're very much learning skills. They learn to recognise their parents' voices. They're starting to develop some skills in terms of their arms and their legs, and some of those motor bits and pieces. And they also come out with primary reflexes. So they know they can learn to root, so they'll bob their way across to the breast and the nipple. They've got the ability to suck. They've got reflexes around, if you put a finger in their hand, they will grasp it. And if you hold them upright onto a flat surface, they'll move their feet forward almost as if they're walking, as well as having a reflex around gagging and coughing, which we obviously keep for years to come. They come out with some vision and some hearing, and also the ability to communicate, most sort of primarily that cry to let you know that they need something.
And how do babies develop over their first 6 months of life? What are the key milestones?
Okay. So obviously they develop an awful lot in those first six months. There's a hell of a lot of learning that takes place. So in the first kind of 2 months, they'll learn to turn their head from side to side. If they're lying on their back, they'll start to get more purpose and more control over their arms and legs as they're waving them around. Around 2 months, they might be able to briefly hold a toy in their hand, but they'll probably drop it very quickly. And they'll start to be able to get some control over their eyes. They'll start to be able to follow an object. They'll start to discover their voice. They'll make cooing sounds and oohs and ahs. And at around 6 to 8 weeks, they'll do that magical thing of starting to smile with purpose when someone talks to them. And if you're talking to a baby around 2 months, they'll start to make sounds back to you, start to kind of almost have a conversation with you. And as part of that, they will start to maintain deliberate eye contact as well. And they'll still obviously be able to cry to communicate their needs to you. As they get older, at around 4 months, as they're lying on their tummy, you'll be starting to see them able to kind of hold their head and their chest area up and gain kind of more control over their head. And if you're holding them sitting, you would be expecting them to be able to have head control most of the time, holding it kind of fairly firm and steady. You're no longer kind of worried that I always kind of joke about, oh, their head's going to fall off, but at that point you would expect that kind of that to have gone. When they're laying on their back, you would start to see them bringing their hands very purposefully together over their chest, kind of touching their fingers together. And again, when you're holding them up, you should see them starting to kind of reach forward to try and get toys with purpose. I mean, initially they just kind of bat them and hit them, but they've got an idea about where they want their hand to go, and it's starting to do what they want them to. Again, they'll be getting better at holding toys, so they'll be able to hold them a bit more and wave them with purpose in front of their face and following them, and they might talk to their toy while it's there in front of them. As I say, getting better. Occasionally at this age they still bop themselves around the head with their toys, which is always a bit of a shock for them, bless them, but they tend to recover from that fairly quickly. They start to become more social. So as well as those cooing conversations that they will have with you, they'll start to show excitement when you come back. So if you've gone out of sight for a bit and you return, they'll kick and wave their arms about or coo with more purpose to show that they're excited. And the other thing that they'll start to do, which can be very cute, is if they're in front of a mirror where they can see themselves, they'll start to have conversations and coo at themselves. It was something that my daughter used to do. She used to love it. She would sit and have conversations with herself, and then for no reason that I could determine, she would say something to herself and offend herself and burst into tears, which was, sad, but also kind of quite delightful to see.
Quite cute.
That's very cute. That's your sort of 4-month-old. And then by around 6 months old, you'll start to see babies begin to roll. So they'll roll from the front, usually from the front to the back first, and then once they've mastered that, they'll then be able to roll from the back to the front. They'll be beginning to sit up with a bit more, with a bit less support, so they're a bit more in control of it. And some babies will be starting to get into kind of a crawling position, so kind of on their all fours, on their hands, on their knees, beginning to kind of do some possibly rocking. They're getting much more controlled with their hands and arm movements, so if they're reaching for a toy, they should be managing to get it most of the time. And they're starting to get some more kind of fine skills with their fingers, so being able to kind of pick things up with the start of a pincer grip. When they're holding toys, they should now be able to pass them backwards and forwards from one hand to another. So they've got to be able to pick that toy up, they've got to be able to pass it to the other toy and then release it with purpose. Before that, they kind of bang toys on the floor and it kind of accidentally comes out of their hand. The next step is actually being able to release it into the grasp of the other one. And they'll start to discover their feet as well. So when they're on the back, they'll start to kind of find their toes if they haven't got their socks on, and some children will start to chew their toes at this point as well. They continue to be really communicative, so they're continuing to make those babbling sounds and beginning to make some kind of sounds like da, ka, ma, those kind of things. Beginning to squeal and laugh at delight when you're playing, games with them like peekaboo and things like that. They might start to lift their arms and hands up kind of like this to indicate that they want to be picked up. And some children around 6 months might start to become a little bit more reserved around strangers, although it tends to happen a little bit later for children. And I should say, with all of those steps that I've gone through, those are rough ages that children should start to do things. Children aren't textbooks, babies aren't textbooks. They do things in their own time and their own way. What you want to be seeing is a kind of progression through them learning new skills. But if, for example, your 4-month-old isn't rolling from their your 6-month-old, rather I should say, isn't rolling from their front to their back, you don't need to be massively worried. For example, I know some children who learn to roll from their front to their back because they're not massive fans of tummy time, work out how to roll from their back to their front once, never do it again. They're like, why would I want to be there? I'm back on tummy time. So it's about taking the child in the whole context rather than thinking, oh, they're 2 months, they haven't done this yet. So yeah.
And of course, parents will worry about comparing their child to someone else's and they're not doing this or they haven't done this yet. So when, as a maternity nurse, should people be pointing parents towards additional support when they're concerned about a baby not meeting those developmental milestones? When are the causes for concern?
Okay, so as I said, it's a continuum, it's a spectrum. So just kind of one thing that's a little bit delayed is the wrong word, but not doing the same as the child next door isn't something to be worried about. Some of the things that you might want to kind of look out and keep a bit of an eye on. So if your baby isn't responding to loud sounds or startling to loud noises, particularly in those newborn phases, then you might want to have things like hearing checked again. It should all have been checked at the hospital or by the midwives before discharge if there's been a home birth. But if you're concerned that baby's possibly not hearing and not picking up on things, it can be worth, getting hearing rechecked. Same if they don't seem to be kind of responding to bright lights, don't seem to be starting to follow toys that are tracked in front of them, don't seem to be kind of maintaining eye contact or starting to make eye contact, you might want to have their vision checked again. If they don't seem to be gaining control of their limbs or starting to kind of move with purpose, trying to reach out for things, again, that might be something you want to have a chat with a health visitor about, just to kind of get their thought about it. Obviously, health visitors see lots of babies across the week, so they've got a better idea about what actually is just, yeah, that's fine, that's just a baby that's not massively interested in doing X, Y, or Z, or actually, yeah, maybe we do need to look into it more. If children don't seem to be interested or curious in their surroundings around them, again, that might be something. So that's quite a subtle thing, but if they just don't seem to be kind of responding or, as I say, progressing or making any progress, it's a very difficult thing to put your finger on in a one-off situation, but it's almost if there's that little niggle, and that little niggle that lasts for longer than a short period of time, just getting a second opinion around things. And then the other thing that can potentially be a sign of something that might need some support is if those newborn reflexes are still around and very prominent. Some of them go after a few weeks, some of them take kind of 4, 5, 6 months, but if they're still around quite prominently to kind of 5 to 6 months, you might be starting to think, actually, let's get a second opinion around that as well.
So how does being premature affect baby's development?
Okay, obviously if you're born early, you haven't had as long in the womb to develop, so you are, as a baby who's born prematurely, you're coming out at an earlier stage in your development. So one of the key things to remember with newborn babies is to almost age adjust your development expectations to their kind of due date rather than when they actually arrived in the world. And for some babies, depending on obviously how early they were, how unwell they've been, how long they've spent in NICU, will depend on how much of an impact there is on their development. For some babies who've been in NICU, who've arrived very early and been in NICU for a long time, the process of actually being in that NICU space, on the incubators, in the positions that they are in the incubators, can have an impact on, you know, motor control and limb strength and things like that. It's a very different environment to being in the womb for the last part of pregnancy, where it's quite, you know, tight and compact and you're curled up and all of those things. So the important thing, as I said, is to remember to kind of age adjust your expectations for what the baby is able to do to that expected due date rather than the delivery date. But overall, over time, children should start to catch up with their peers, but it can take them kind of up to 2 years to catch up. And being late with one developmental stage will have a knock-on effect for other developmental stages. So, for example, if you're later to roll over, you're probably going to be later to sit up, because the act of rolling over helps strengthen the trunk muscles, which are important to be stable to enable you to sit up. So it's just about really being aware for those premature babies, but still having robust expectations for them, so still supporting their development, but not being overly concerned if they're not hitting those milestones on their birth date. Just remembering to kind of think about actually what is your age adjusted age for those premature babies.
And what are some good ways that maternity nurses can encourage parents to help their child's development?
Okay, so I think for some parents, having a newborn baby can feel very strange. You've got this very dependent child that doesn't seem to be doing a lot. So for some parents, they don't think there's a lot that they can do, or that there's even much point to doing with their newborn babies. And they can also feel quite self-conscious about doing things with their newborn babies. I think for some of us that have lived and worked in the early years sector, talking to children and babies for years, we can forget that it's not natural for everybody to do things like that. So I think it's about kind of really reassuring and modelling parents that it's okay to be a bit daft, and this might feel a bit strange, but actually it's really beneficial, and to kind of just role model doing some of the things with the baby as well, so that the parents can kind of see, oh, okay, it is okay to be a bit daft. For example, I remember playing with I think it must have been about a 4-month-old at one point, and pulling loads of really bizarre faces with the baby in response to what the baby was doing to me. And the baby was loving it. The smiles coming off the baby's face and the laughs and the eye contact the baby was giving me was amazing. I was getting loads of feedback that yes, the baby was really wanting this and thinking it was amazing. Someone across the room who didn't have children said to me, gosh, you must be terrifying that child. And I think it was someone that hadn't worked with children, hadn't had children, and to them what they were just seeing was an adult making really strange kind of faces that we wouldn't make to other adults, and they couldn't really understand what I was doing. So it's about helping parents kind of understand that and get past that, and actually you're not going to be scaring your child, you're actually going to be providing lots of really good support for them. So some of the things that are really beneficial for babies under 6 months old is primarily talking to them, communicating with them from day one, you know, talking to them about what they're doing, what you're doing when you're changing their nappy or taking the nappy off. Oh, that feels a bit cold. I'm wiping you, I'm, you know, putting your clothes, here's your foot. Just really naming what's going on and naming what's happening for the baby as well. So if the baby's happy or sad or showing a bit of distress, just saying, oh, I can see that you're really sad. Or if they're really hungry and you're bottle feeding and, you know, they're having to wait for the bottle to cool, you know, talking to them, oh, I know you're really, really hungry, it's frustrating, isn't it, it's coming. And then when they get the bottle or they get the breast and they calm and relax, kind of, oh, that's better, isn't it, oh, you've got your food, that feels nice. singing to them can be amazing as well. It brings in all kinds of rhythms and tones of voice and helps develop kind of hearing and early language. And doing action rhymes where you're touching different parts of their body or crossing their arms and legs over, to help them kind of just understand where the different areas of their body are and how they move and work. Tummy time is really, really valuable for babies, and it's, you know, I think sometimes people think, well, we never used to talk about tummy time. Well, historically we used to put babies to sleep on their front, so they just naturally got tummy time. Obviously, with all the research that has now come in about, you know, actually back to sleep is much better, and, you know, all the resources there at the Lullaby Trust, we now need to kind of instill in our babies tummy time. They come out wanting to be on their front, and we spend the first few weeks making them go on their back when they don't really want to, and then we turn them over again onto their front and say play on their front. And some children love it. Some children are not massive fans of tummy time, but it's a really valuable, important skill. It helps strengthen their arm muscles, their neck muscles, helps strengthen their trunk, which are all valuable skills for when they're older. Tips for tummy time if they don't seem to be liking it particularly, on mum or dad, skin to skin, with mum just or dad lying there can be a really great way of doing it. My own daughter wasn't a massive fan of tummy time unless she was naked. If you put her just before bath time or at any other point of the day with no clothes on a towel, on her change mat, that was it. She loved tummy time. And for children who are more resistant and don't seem to get there, there are devices that you can have, like little cushions you can put under to help them, because for some children they haven't got the head control. Their face is just squished on the floor and they're not massive fans of it. And really kind of short but regular bursts, so popping them onto their tummy even for 30 seconds, and if at that point they're then going, oh, I don't like it, taking them away, but in an hour's time popping them for 30 seconds again. And it's surprising how quickly you can build those 30 seconds up to a minute, to a couple of minutes, till you suddenly realize that they've been on their tummy for 5 minutes and have been absolutely loving it. And then the other thing is also providing them with opportunities to be on their back as well, so that they can move their limbs, they can kick around, they can be, you know, freely moving for things. So not always sat in bouncy chairs, or, you know, car seats, which obviously aren't great for babies because of the head positioning. So an activity mat where they can be, you know, freely moving about. And then having a range of simple toys. So for newborns, they really like contrasting colours. So blacks, whites, reds, with kind of simple patterns that they can look at, or things that imitate a face. So with, you know, 2 dots and a nose and something that imitates a face. Simple colourful toys that can be held in front and rattled, and then obviously as children get older, on those activity arches with some toys dangling off them so that children can start to be reaching out. And if they're toys that make a noise or crinkle, so they get some positive reward back for doing some of those things. And then obviously if the parent's sitting close by and encouraging them. So they're all kind of ideas of things in those first few months that can support children's development. Another thing to be aware of for newborns is that they have kind of immature fixed vision of around 25 centimetres, where the focal point comes in. Everything else is kind of blurry around them. And then that's the kind of perfect distance from the breast to the mother's eyes. So if you're showing baby things, or you're talking to your newborn baby, having them around about that distance can be really beneficial. And newborn babies also show a preference to faces and visual things. It's all part of them helping to learn to develop and socialise with others around them.
Fantastic. Do you have any other tips for our maternity nurses working with new parents?
Gosh, what would I have liked? I think as a new mum, a warm cup of tea that was in reach. I would often make a cup of tea, and then sit down to hopefully try and drink it with my baby in tow, and then realise that I'd put the cup of tea out of reach. And by the time you could then get back to it, it was gold. The amount of times that I reheated tea in the microwave as a new mum. And I think just some understanding about, particularly if it's a first child, how overwhelming the transition to being a parent can be. From my own experience, those first few weeks were fine. You know, they were challenging and they were difficult, but we were doing all right. But over time, as the sleep deprivation from the night feeds kicked in, it started to get a bit more kind of overwhelming. So just having that real support around, and I think as a nursery nurse, trying to preempt actually what a parent might want, what a parent might need. Here, I've made you a cup of tea. Here, I've put the washing away for you. I've emptied the draining board. I've sterilised the bottles, or you know, I've put the load of washing on. I've hoovered. Just kind of preempting so that the parent isn't having to kind of ask all the time. You know, obviously you need to form that relationship with the parents first and find out a little bit of a boundary. But for me, the best help that I had was someone who just kind of quietly and gently got on with it in the background, and maybe came and said to me, you know, is it okay if I do X, Y, and Z? And then after I'd said a couple of times, yeah, that was fine, just did it and said, I've come and done this. It was that was amazing from my point of view as a new mum.
Oh, well, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. It's been really informative.
Thank you. I hope it's helpful.